The topic here is a pretty complex one, but I'll try as much as possible to do a bit of justice to it, as I actually doubt that I'll be able to do justice 100% to this. And I'm relying on the fact that there is another panel session after this that will also speak into the same topic. So hopefully the combination of the two should provide a richer insight into the topic generally. So the topic is about driving efficiency and profitability in African retail. I'm narrowing it down to Nigeria specifically, just to bring home some key lessons, but I'll first of all speak to the African markets generally. And the perspective I'm bringing here is a broad perspective that focuses on retail generally, beyond just retail within the FMCG space, but also retail within the financial service space, the healthcare space, and the economy generally. So yeah, let's go. I might actually spend less than 30 minutes, but let's see how this goes. The first part is to set the context right in terms of what the size or the attributes of the African retail market is. Is Africa really a retail play in the real sense of it, right? It is quite important to dimension this in order to better situate the quest for profitability and efficiency within that space overall. So looking at the African market from a demographic standpoint, it is pretty simple to reach the conclusion that the African market is pretty much a retail play. And that is primarily because from a demographic perspective, the continent is extremely young, with a median age of about 19 years old. And this average age is expected to drive consumption patterns and ultimately economic growth over the next couple of years. Of course, this is slightly subjected to limitation imposed by purchasing power, which we'll see as we discuss this further. So overall, in terms of size, the African market is pretty big. And size now defining the geographic boundaries of Africa as a continent, and more importantly, the number of people living on the African continent. We control more than 20% in terms of the land area of global land area, and that is quite meaningful. That is 1/5 of the global land area is occupied by African continent. That's a huge landmass out there. And in terms of number of people as well, about 1.5 billion people represent approximately 20% of the global population. Also portends the African market is pretty big in terms of landmass and the number of people. However, this size is constrained, as I mentioned earlier, by purchasing power. Because if you have 1.5 billion people with significantly low purchasing power on the aggregate, the economic activities might not be as much as what you have in a lower population continent, but with significantly high purchasing power. And right now, from the African standpoint, purchasing power is significantly low in the single-digit thousands. Maybe in some countries, we even have as low as less than $1,000 per annum. And in Nigeria, well, this is even before we talk about the impact of currency devaluation, which impacts significantly the value of purchasing power of the local populace. The one key other element that is quite important when it comes to sizing whether the African market is a retail play or not is the question of policy stability, which focuses on both macroeconomic policies and other policies that affect living standard of an average African retail consumer. And this pertains to what kind of policies drive the required infrastructure investments needed on the continent. We all know that Africa has significant deficit when it comes to infrastructure ranging from rail to electricity to airports, name it. So there is significant infrastructure gap. And to fill that gap, it requires concerted effort around policies geared towards driving the necessary capital, or attracting the necessary capital to bridge that investment, that infrastructure gap. So overall, looking at these key factors, or the 4 factors I've mentioned here, we can easily reach the conclusion that Africa is really a retail play, because the population is young, which means an average young person will have to make key life moment decisions like buying cars, building houses, raising families. providing education for their kids. So consumption pattern actually depict that African market can be a very strong retail play. That said, we then look at within the retail space in the African markets, what does that retail play look like in terms of the distribution of retail behavior between online and offline, right? Generally, we've seen significant trend globally around how retail consumers actually behave when it comes to purchasing decisions, right? We've seen significant movement to online behavior. On the average, global right now is 16% of retail purchases or retail transactions are happening online. Within the African continent, that percentage is significantly low, and that percentage is less than 1% actually, or roughly 1% on the African continent, which means that the African market is still largely offline. Whether that's a good thing or not, I think is subject to debate, right? But what we find is that there is a huge divergence between the way African retail markets behave from a transaction standpoint and the trend that is happening globally. Even though we've seen some growth within the African market, we're saying that there is still that huge gap between what the African market is doing and what the global market is doing. Hope I'm still audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Awesome. So, as we all know, within the 21st century, lifestyle has changed globally. Also, within the African markets, consumer lifestyle has changed drastically. Right now, we live our life largely online. Well, not majority, but a growing percentage of the African population, a growing percentage of global population live largely online. They consume online. They make purchases online. They order rides online. They shop online. They do so many things online. They do bank online. They book flights online. So most of our lifestyles are changing significantly in terms of online dominance. But we haven't seen that kind of rapid growth or proportion within the African market. And that actually poses significant opportunity, especially when that trend is global and we can't go against it. So the question is, how long will it take for the African market, for example, to average global online purchasing, online retail contribution to online contribution retail purchases of, say, 16%? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? Or we may never even get there. I think these are important questions any retail stakeholder should start asking. Then that's the retail in terms of offline and online dichotomy. But there is another dimension that is very important for us to look at, and that is the distinction between what retail does either in terms of formal and in terms of informal. Culturally, I think to a very large extent, this might be like a clash of culture, right? Statistically, right now, just about 10% of African retail goes through the formal channel, and about 90% goes through the informal channel. So we are informal largely. So if you look at the combination of the two, we are largely offline, and then we are largely informal. That posits a unique sense of the attributes of the African retail market. But to add some more context to the informal and formal settings, there are some numbers there that I would like us to look at largely. There are two dimensions that I was trying to pass across. The first dimension is the dichotomy between online and offline, which we've established that largely the African market is still 99% offline and 1% online versus global average of about 16%. Then the second dimension is around the formal and informal settings, which shows that currently the formal markets contribute just or drives just about 10% of African retail, and 90% of the African retail is still driven largely by informal. Of course, this is largely driven by cultures, some unique circumstances that African markets or African retail markets is known for. Now, to further drive this home, we can look at comparison of key African cities in terms of their formal retail penetration versus other parts of the world, right? And here we're looking at, say, Lagos, Dar es Salaam, Accra, Abidjan, Nairobi. And this is the data from Knight Frank research. And this also shows that while African market is largely informal, we've seen some other countries in other parts of the world where there is significant level of formality when it comes to retail. And so surprisingly, you'll expect Lagos, with the population and size of the GDP, to exhibit significant large number of formal settings. But unfortunately, data shows the opposite. In fact, Lagos is less formal versus, say, Dar es Salaam or Accra or Kampala or Harare. In fact, in all of the African countries compared here, Lagos is the least formal. And least formal mean that the number of, or the value of gross leasable area per capita. Lagos has one of the least amount of gross leasable area per capita. So this shows that there is either significant growth opportunities in terms of formalization of the retail market in Africa, or there is a unique sense of African market that just have to be informal, largely, right? But one thing also we've noticed is that there has been some growth in formalization, but that growth hasn't been as strong as one would have expected, given the huge size of that informal sector. So that said, let's then look at what the future holds, right? Is it more formal or more online or more of both, right? From what we've seen so far, what I can posit to some level of confidence is that there will be significant growth observed within the formal settings, and there will also be significant growth observed in terms of driving of purchases online. And that is primarily because of some of the lifestyle changes, lifestyle trends that are happening locally and that are happening locally among the African countries, right? Now, a key part of that is to look at some of the cultural shifts that we're seeing when it comes to consumer behavior. And I'll cite one key example of that. And that key example draws from the Nigerian consumer behavior, right? This is a decade view of consumer spending behavior in Nigeria. And it shows significant growth when it comes to where consumers are actually spending or how they're spending, the channel of spending. While this may not directly relate to the consumer markets, it is a reflection of how consumers are getting more comfortable with online spending, like spending online, using digital channel to perfect their payments. And of course, for a retail, payment is an important part of that. So if consumers are exercising significant or consumers are showing significant confidence in spending online, in embracing online or digital payment channel, it means that we can see that in terms of how it can impact retail positioning as well. So as an example, this is the volume of electronic transactions in Nigeria in billions, right? And over the last 10 years, that volume has exhibited about 70% on over a 10-year period. That is a remarkable growth. So digital channels are getting better and better, right? But again, beyond the sheer growth in this volume of transaction, electronic transaction volume, what is also more striking is the insights embedded in this growth. And that is the fact that, one, this growth is largely driven by customers or consumers within the ages of 15 and 45. Why this is important is because it connects to the African demographics. If the average age is 19, and we're seeing significant adoption of online payment channel by the young people, it simply means that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, when people less than 18 will be dominantly in the labor force, will be dominantly within the working age population, their behavior has already been cultured to be online, to be digital. So retail needs to meet that as well. So, and this is part of the areas that efficiency and scale can be extracted, especially for African retail play. So there are significant leading indicators right now that are showing the direction of consumer behavior, and retail needs to match along those directions. Then the second part is that 80% of those transactions are actually initiated via mobile phones. Yeah, this speaks to something that is relatively obvious, right? We have Africa is largely mobile. People are making use of mobile phones. Don't get me wrong, we still have some maybe sizable percentage that doesn't have mobile phone. But in terms of growth, we're seeing significant growth in the level of mobile adoption and internet penetration than we've ever seen in the past 10, 20 years. So that is remarkable. And the last part is that the average transaction value has been dropping significantly, right? In the past, institutions dominated electronic payment channel. And for the consumers, retail consumers, cash was king. Cash is still king, don't get me wrong, but we're seeing significant growth in digital payments. So if the average transaction value is declining, it shows that we're seeing significant growth in the number of small transaction values going through digital payments. And the implication of that is that people are getting a lot more comfortable using digital payments. People are getting a lot more comfortable perfecting daily transactions, simple transactions, low-value transactions with digital channels. So their behaviors are being cultured, their behaviors are being shaped to ensure that when it comes to anything digital, they're comfortable with it. And in fact, sometimes the default expectation is that some behavior should just be digital because that is what they are used to. So if we can look into the future, 10 years from now, people will start asking questions that why were certain transactions cash-based 10 years ago? Just as we will start questioning how people lived in Nigeria, say 20, 25 years ago, when you couldn't make withdrawals from different bank branches, in such a way that when you are banking with, say, GT Bank in Ibadan, and you wanted to make a withdrawal, you have to withdraw at GT Bank in Ibadan or First Bank in Ibadan. If you're in Lagos, you have to go back to Lagos. You have to go back to Ibadan to do that. As an average 19-year-old or 20-year-old today, they can't understand that behavior because today, it is just a default expectation that if I have a bank account with any bank at all today, anywhere in the country, if there is a bank branch there or an ATM, I should be able to make a transaction. But that wasn't the case. So I think the same narrative will apply to what is currently obtainable in retails. The question basically is that in the next 10, 20 years, what retail is today will drastically change, especially given the strong trend we've seen in some of these digital behaviors among the young people. We will dominantly become a big force in the next 10 to 20 years, both in the labor force and in the work age brackets. Now, for the African market, the African retail consumer, normally demographic characteristics and the evolution of the African consumer market, African consumer makes a strong justification for its profitability under condition of efficient scale. And the way to look at this really is to say, if you're looking at some of the biggest retail plays in Africa today, we can look at telecom companies, and we can also look at, say, the banking system, right? At least we have some African banks, well, even in Nigeria, with customer base of about 20, 25 million, 30 million customers right now. That's a sizable number, given our population of about 220 to 215 to 20 million people. A banking player with about 20, 30 million customer is sizable, is a major retail play, right? Now, if that bank didn't exist in Nigeria and the bank wanted to start banking operations in Nigeria today, what kind of strategy will they implement in order to have an eye towards achieving 20, 30 million customers, say in the next 10, 15, 20 years? I'm sure they are not likely to go by the strategies that they went through when that bank started in the 80s, say GTB. Of course, most Nigerian banks started by building large retail infrastructure largely branches, and they invested heavily in that infrastructure, that branch network. They still operate a good number of them right now. But looking into the future, if they were to start today to build a bank brand today that is focused on retail, I doubt that the strategy will include extensive physical branch network. And that is primarily because consumer behavior has changed. Right now, an average retail consumer in Africa or in Nigeria, in most parts of Africa, has a phone. And for most of the branches, they might not be economically viable, as we've seen in some of the data shared by those that are publicly listed. So branch network is no longer a sustainable means to serve consumers into the future. They still serve a purpose right now, but they are no longer the future of distribution. So distribution within the retail space is it has extremely evolved into something that is less physical, but more of an embedded nature. And that is why condition of efficient scale matters a lot. How many branches, for example, do you need to have and complement your digital presence with those branches such that you become extremely profitable, given the low purchasing power of African retail, given the age demographic of African retail, given the level of education of African retail, for example. So it's extremely important to understand that, one, African retail can be extremely profitable, and this is taken from the position of a financial service provider with more than 1 million customer base. It is a tough task to do, but once done, African retailer, for example, African retail consumer right now can be extremely, extremely profitable. But I'll speak to this in terms of the type of distribution and distribution models that have evolved over the last 20 years and what those models will likely look like in the next 20 years, and extracting some efficiency plays that can drive significant profitability for any African retail play, right? Whether within the FMCG space or within the financial service space or within the healthcare space. While these are different sectors, some commonalities exist that are essential when it comes to how the retail play can be profitably exercised. So the first one is discoverability, right? Whether you're selling a product or you're providing services, the first question is, how are consumers discovering your product or your service? 2 years ago, it will largely be a consumer walking into a store, walking into a bank branch, or seeing their adverts, right? But today, the discovery channels have evolved, right? Right now, we have virtual stores, through mobile apps, through websites, through online communities. Physical stores are still there, but they have their limitations. So if I'm setting up a physical store in Kwara State, for example, only Kwarans can see it. In terms of probability of them seeing it, only Kwarans can see it. A Lagosian is not likely to see it except if that Lagosian travels to Kwara State, right? Even when it comes to actual patronization of that store, if all you have is just physical store, it means your market is limited to the area that you are. But today, there are virtual stores. There are companies in Nigeria with just one physical office, but they've been able to reach millions of customers. That wasn't possible 20 years ago. The major reason why they're able to do that is they've leveraged the efficiencies that can be harvested from leveraging virtual stores, from leveraging online communities, from leveraging online presence, their own footprint to reach out to millions of people. However, being discoverable virtually is not enough. The entire value chain needs to be completed. When you are discovered, how do you serve the customers, right? If all you have is a physical store, a physical presence, even if you're discovered in other parts of the world, how do you bridge the demand-supply gap? such that when customers are demanding for your product, you're able to serve them efficiently, right? And that is where delivery and payment comes in. You cannot serve someone in a different location if there is no payment connection. So are we still relying on cash? Are we relying on digital payments? Are we relying on credit? So payment is essential. And right now we've seen significant growth in payment infrastructure in Nigeria, especially from the digital side. And a good number of retail businesses, SMEs, are incorporating digital payments into their fulfillment experience. That is essential because one, the retail consumers are used to it. So the retailers also need to catch up to that by ensuring that that preferred payment methods is actually available. Then the other part is the delivery. How do we get the product delivered? If you're offering services like CarryWise, for example, it's pretty simple. The service is delivered virtually. It's delivered online, it's delivered digitally, right? There is no physical location where we have an office, but we don't have offices across the country, right? But it could have been extremely difficult if it would have been almost impossible, actually, 20 years ago, for us to acquire 1 million customers with just one office located in Lagos. But today we can do that. And one other thing that is essential to note is that what we did to acquire 1 million customers 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago is extremely different from what we can do in order to acquire the next one or the next 3, 4 million customers in the next 4, 5 years. Because those channels of acquisitions are also extremely dynamic. And I'll give some examples. When we started in 2018, we made some experiments by making some adverts on Google Play Store. And then I remember vividly, then we're spending about $1,000 a month, right, on digital ads in order to make our product available, to create awareness. And I remember vividly on Google Play Store then, with $1,000 a month, we will be the #1 trending financial app in the country with just $1,000. But today, even when you spend $100,000 a month, you might not be the #1 trending financial app in the country because that channel is now saturated. You have a lot of financial service providers who are also exploring the same channel, who are spending shitload of money on this channel. So the competition is intense. So what used to work for us 3, 4, 5 years ago can't work again right now. So the channels are also changing extremely fast. And that's something we need to put in mind, right? And as the channels are changing, new channels are evolving. Right now, there are businesses that are doing significant volume, this significant awareness. They're generating significant awareness on, say, TikTok, for example. But TikTok wasn't a thing a few years ago. But now it is contributing to business development. It's contributing to how products get delivered, how products get discovered. Then the last part here is customer experience. When customers interact with the brand after discovering the product, they've made payments, they're getting delivery. What kind of experience do they have? And why this is important is this. If all I have is a physical store, the best efficiency I can get from a physical store is a customer coming in, getting the product, customer being happy, and the customer can make referrals, right? Other customers can walk into the stores to buy items. But the market opportunity is limited to that area. It is location specific. But if I can combine my physical store or physical presence with an online, it means my referral potential increase dramatically. So if I satisfy a customer in Lagos, that customers can make referral to someone who is living in Jos, to someone who is living in Borno, or to someone who is living outside Nigeria. And they can also have the same direct access to our benefits of our products. So referral become extremely powerful, especially if you have a product that meets specific needs. When customers are happy and they refer your product, the best way to derive maximum efficiency from that referral is to be able to serve the customers anywhere they are. And that doesn't mean that you must be physically present. It only means that you must develop the capability to be able to serve those customers wherever they are. So some of these efficiency plays are things that they seem obvious, but they may be extremely difficult to execute. Because between the process of making referrals and serving customers from a different location, there is a delivery that needs to happen, the logistics. And fair enough, we may not have significant presence, we may not have huge or world-class logistic infrastructure in Africa, in some parts of Nigeria. But we have companies that are playing significant role, making millions of dollars of investments annually in order to bridge that logistic gap. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it is something that is worth looking at, because right now consumers like convenience. They like the comfort. They are already developing significantly strong culture when it comes to online purchases. And the beauty of it is that there is no winner yet, to be honest. There is no winner yet, but significant investments running into billions of dollars have gone into creating that awareness, building the culture of online purchases, online behavior. So whoever can take advantage of the opportunities that exist right now and the awareness that has been created can actually be a category king. So the opportunity is still there. So overall, distribution models have evolved over the past 20 years. And when I mention distribution model, what I'm speaking to largely is the entire process between when a customer discovers a product or service, the last point where customer makes referral as a result of either being happy or makes the other one as a result of not being happy. That entire loop has changed significantly. And we're to a number of models that are currently existing and that will change is to look at the combination of different verticals here, like discoverability. We can take physical store, for example. If you have just one physical store, you don't have any virtual stores, you are not discoverable online. That is the model. You can match that model with how customers pay you, how customers get value delivered to you as a result of exchange of value from you. Is it cash? If it is cash, then you can have a physical store model that is layered with cash. And if it is layered with cash, what kind of experience do customers get? Is it in-store experience, or they pick up the item, or you do delivery for them? You can, let's say they pick up the item from your store. And then the last part, let's say they are happy. That is the model. That's the distribution model. So people only get to see you via the physical store. They pay for your product via cash, and they walk in into they walk in to pick up the item, and yeah, they're happy. But you can have a physical store, or you can have a virtual store that is a combination of cash and digital payments, that is a combination of in-store experience or pickup and delivery. And the customers can still be happy. So there is countless number of models that can be created given these different touch points, right? And that is the evolution that we're talking about. And a lot of creativities are happening when it comes to business model innovation that can serve the customers better. So different different efficiencies that can enable you either become extremely profitable or not. The other part that is quite important to point to when it comes to driving efficiency and profitability is that the African market is a game of number. Given the economic factor or limitation that purchasing power is low, but we have large number of people. And to be honest, it will take decades, except we have the miracle of what happened in China, for us to significantly change our per capita income in a very short period of time. So this thing is quite sticky. So it takes a while before we can change the fortune of per capita income over time. So given that constraint, but we have large number of people, it means the only way to ensure consistent profitability, especially when the focus is retail, is to find a way to service the retail market at scale. And serving the retail market at scale can be done using different models. Is either you do the physical model or you do virtual model. But what we've seen is that because you're serving customers who have low purchasing power, who probably purchase low tickets value items, your best bet is to be able to acquire those customers at a ridiculously low value, low cost. And the only way you can do that is either via technology or partnership or embedded opportunities or product bundling. So there is a concept of scale that must happen if we must ensure profitability, because efficiency can be derived from scale. Now, one thing we've seen is that partnership can be a major factor of efficiency play when it comes to retail. Well, this depends on the nature of product and nature of service, but it can be a major factor. And one thing we've seen, for example, is embedded finance, the trend of embedded finance in recent times. While that may not be a function of scale directly, it can actually stimulate scale for the business, right? So if there is strong embedded finance opportunity to ensure that customers can have payments happening smoothly, or customers can have credits, and these credits can apply to both the retail store themselves and the consumers. That can stimulate demand given the constraints of low per capita income, right? But again, the capital needs to come from somewhere. We all know that the African market is still very underpenetrated when it comes to consumer credits, right? So the banks have tried, they're still trying, but it is very possible that the way credits got penetrated in most advanced countries might not be the path that the African market will take, right? In more advanced countries, largely banks. But in the African market, given today's world, today's trend, today's happening, today's reality, do we need to go through the banking system to create credits? Maybe not. It could be a combination of the two. So we've seen significant growth in embedded finance, but it's still not yet fully tested to be confident enough to say it is moving the needle. But theoretically, the opportunity looks appealing. If you're able to provide credit to consumers at the point of purchase and able to finance the value chain for the retailers, then you can unlock significant opportunity both from the demand side and the supply side. And because you have a clear line of sight between the entry point and exit point for the value, you can capture your value and again ensure that NPLs are significantly low. But this also needs to be considered in terms of where will the capital come from. Will the key players within the retail space provide the capital, or will they do that in partnership with the banks? There is something the banks have that we don't. And that is the fact that they have the experience of what writing good credit is. So you might want to rely on them. And that is where partnership comes in. So even though if we're talking about embedded finance, I think there is still a bigger role for the banks to play when it comes to the underwriting of credit. Then the other thing that can also significant efficiency is product bundling. And I'll give example of this, especially within the insurance space. Insurance, for example, as a service is extremely underpenetrated. We're looking at the numbers recently and we realize that in the past 20 years, there hasn't been any material growth when it comes to insurance penetration at the retail level. Most of insurance growth is still largely, corporate and so on and so forth. At the retail level, it's still low, less than 1%. But can that story change, especially with product bundling? And we've seen some of this happening within the telecom industry, like bundling insurance with credits, with credits, bundling insurance with credit and bundling credits with calls, right? Some telecom companies are doing that right now, right? Experimentation of whether the product will work or not, because you can reach out to millions of customers at scale, given that there are some retail play that have already captured those customers. So instead of starting from ground zero, you can easily experiment and see what works and what doesn't. And that is one key source of efficiency, especially when it comes to capital utilization. So we've seen this in insurance. It can also apply to healthcare. For example, right now, instead of individuals having to get their, HMO, there is that opportunity that once you have employment, you have HMO, right? And that is automatic customer acquisition for the healthcare providers. So overall, partnership is an important factor that we believe strongly can drive efficiencies for any retail play. So instead of starting all the way from ground zero to acquire 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, or 4 million customers, why not get players that already have millions of customers operating in adjacent opportunities that can easily allow your product to be sold to them, right? We do that as well at CarryWise. We have a couple of partnerships that are existing with other players with millions of customers in order to make the product a lot easier for them to discover. So I think overall, efficiency and profitability can be driven by recognizing the unique circumstances of the African market, that, yeah, the purchasing power is pretty low, but we have the human cap, we have the number of people, like the bodies. However, purchasing power to rise, but it takes time for that to happen. And there are so many variables involved. Good policies, consistent growth. It happened in China, it happened in some Asian countries. Will it happen in Nigeria, in Africa? Well, we hope it happens. But we can't rely on that because it takes time to happen. 20, 30 years before we can get to, say, $10,000 per capita or 20,000 per capita, income per capita. But given the number of people and low per capita income, the major driver of profitability for that segment of the economy is scale. How can you acquire 20 million customers in a very short period of time? I don't think doing that one customer at a time is the way to go. It can be shortened if partnership is leveraged significantly. Competition is something that the African market is, especially at the retail level, is battling with right now, either as a destroyer of efficiency or something that can be leveraged for source of profitability and efficiency. And the way this happens is for the African consumers, they consume products from all parts of the world. I buy products from Amazon. Most people buy products from Amazon. Most people buy products from other parts of the world and they get shipped down here. It doesn't mean people aren't loyal to the African brand. And the interesting thing is that what people even consume is not necessarily global brand. They are just regular brand from other parts of the world as long as they meet the basic need of an average consumer. So the competition has gone beyond local. There is now global competition for the handful of African middle class that ordinarily the retail market in Africa should serve. So competition is now a bit more global. My summary is this. For the African retail consumer, he is a very profitable customer. And retail players can have significant profitability, but they must recognize that consumer behavior is fast changing and play to the strengths of those changes. Per capita income is low. The only thing that can compensate for that is scale. And to be able to scale, you must be able to acquire those customers at a unit cost. And one area that unit cost can be significantly low when it comes to acquisition is to leverage partnership, especially for retail players that have acquired significant number of customers already. Then the second is the distribution channel, which also speaks to partnership. How do customers discover your product and how do customers experience products at the end of the day? That distribution model can define whether you can be efficient or you can be profitable. There are hundreds of distribution channels that African retailers can leverage in order to drive efficiency and profitability. Then the last item is that competition is global, and whether the African retail market can leverage the reverse of that global trend for their own advantage is something that is yet to be seen. But overall, the consumers are impartial. They will get products from wherever they think they get the best value. And so for the African retail, that needs to be in the forefront because the competition has gone beyond just local. And that is primarily because boundaries are breaking, even if there are constraints. But today, we understand that goods move across the world. And there are global logistic infrastructure partners that enable this to happen. So can African retail also leverage that global logistic infrastructure to reverse that trend? Just as you're serving the local market, is it possible for you to serve the global market, just as global markets is serving the African markets? So these are some of the summaries, and thank you so much for your time. I hope this is a bit insightful, and I'm also looking forward to the panel session after this. Thank you.